A lonely teacher set off for remote Alaska after receiving a letter from a stranger she'd once met on a train. But the moment she stepped onto his porch, she froze. Dear friends, before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and how you're feeling today. Enjoy the story. Vera, you've got mail. It looked odd, no return address. A quick, polite smile to the secretary, the envelope tossed onto the desk among stacks of circulars and grade sheets. Vera nodded absently without looking up from her pile of papers. Final exams from the 10th grade, a farewell gift from a class she would never see again. Her last day at Lincoln High was gray and dreary. Outside the tiny teacher's lounge, a light drizzle blurred the glass, curling her hair into unruly waves. From the hallway came the echoing laughter of seniors who had already crossed that invisible line between school and freedom. Vera sighed and set down her red pen. The school year was over, and with it, her temporary contract. The full-time language teacher was coming back from maternity leave, which meant Vera was out. 24 years old, a top honors degree, a specialization in classical literature, and no prospects, except for endless job searches in Chicago, where every opening felt like a distant, unreachable star. She reached for the envelope without much interest, assuming it was just another memo from accounting. The paper was wrinkled, the address handwritten, Vera, teacher of English and Latin, Clark Street School, Chicago. Her heart skipped a beat. That handwriting, firm, slightly sharp, as if written on someone's knee. She knew who it belonged to, though she'd only met him once. Her fingers trembled as she tore open the envelope. The ink had smudged in places, as if snow or water had fallen on it. She read slowly, pausing often, like a freshman struggling through a difficult Greek text. Vera, I forgot the name of your school, but last night I suddenly remembered you said something about Clark Street. I hope this letter reaches you. The polar night just ended here, and it made me think of you. Remember when we watched the stars? Linda's gotten worse. The doctors say it's a matter of months. I tried to visit Arthur over winter break. He's grown up, plays hockey, doesn't hold a grudge, though he understands everything. I often think about our talk on guilt and forgiveness. I think you were right. If you ever find yourself up this way, come visit. Cold Creek Settlement, North Slope County, 600 kilometers from Fairbanks. Gabe. Vera read it twice, then again. 6 months had passed. She had almost forgotten, or forced herself to forget, that December train, the frozen observation car, and the man with gentle lines around his eyes who spoke softly and looked at her as if he could see straight through her. The memory hit suddenly, like a fever. The train car had smelled of stale bedding and yesterday's dinner. Vera tried to read, but the lines of Euripides' Bacchae jumped before her eyes, blending with the blur of the landscape outside. I'm heading to Seattle, to see my daughter. The man across from her, middle-aged, clean-shaven to a bluish tint, buzzed in her ear like a persistent fly. 15 years since we last saw each other, you know? After the divorce. She's married now, has a kid. Vera looked up from her book, trying to keep her face polite. Sorry, I really need to work. The man, Gordon, he'd said his name was, pressed his lips together, offended, but within a minute started again. So, are you a student? Smart one, I bet. She couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her book, muttered an apology, and slipped out into the corridor, closing the compartment door behind her. The attendant gave her a disapproving look as she hurried past, searching for a quiet spot. The observation car at the end of the train was freezing cold. The heater barely worked, and the few passengers there were bundled up in coats and blankets. Vera curled up in a corner, teeth chattering, and opened Euripides again. Mind if I sit here? She looked up. A man in his mid-30s, dark hair with a trace of early gray, was standing beside her with a polite smile. In his hands, a worn paperback. No, she said, shaking her head and sliding closer to the window. Go ahead. He sat down quietly and opened his book. She caught a glimpse of the title of Carms. A man reading Russian absurdists in a freezing American train. How odd. They sat in silence, broken only by the clatter of wheels and the wind howling outside. Then an elderly couple entered, arguing loudly. I'm telling you, Tony, we should have brought the cat. The woman scolded as she sat nearby. Brought the cat? He'd yell the whole way, grumbled the old man. And the fur? The smell? The smell? She snorted. You smell worse than Whiskers does. Vera glanced at the man across from her. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She couldn't help it. She burst out laughing into her palm. He smiled back, just with his eyes. That's how it began. Vera, are you out of your mind? Helen, her only close friend at the school, stared at her wide-eyed. Alaska? A mining camp? You're a philologist, not a geologist. They sat in a small cafe near the Lincoln Park subway. Vera turned her coffee cup in her hands, unable to explain what she didn't understand herself. I'm just visiting a relative, she repeated stubbornly, sticking to the lie she'd practiced. In Seattle. I'll be helping with the kids for the summer. You don't have any relatives in Seattle, Helen said flatly. Helen taught French, was in love with a married vice principal, and dreamed of Paris. But fine, don't tell me. You'll be back in a month anyway. Cold, mosquitoes, bears, such romance. Vera stayed silent. What could she say? That she'd spent her whole life being the good girl, the top student, the promising linguist? That she'd learned several languages, plus Latin and ancient Greek, defended a thesis on Euripides, dreamed of grad school, and for what? To sit in a teacher's lounge grading papers while hearing whispers behind her back, she's just temporary. That nothing held her in Chicago except a half-empty rented room on Clark Street, with a perpetually locked bathroom door and neighbors who started cooking chili at 6 in the morning? That her parents back in Springfield didn't exactly wait for her with open arms? With that useless degree of yours, honey, you might as well marry Cole. He's a P.E. teacher now. Or that last night she woke up suddenly, with a feeling she had to go, to that faraway place where a tired-eyed man had once talked to her about stars scattered over the frozen taiga. I'll be back by September, Vera said. I'll bring you something. An Alaskan keychain with a reindeer, Helen smirked, though there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Fine, crazy woman. Just right, okay? I think they have mail service up there. Sometimes. The ticket counters at Union Station buzzed like a hive. Vera pushed her way to the window, trying not to think about the money in her wallet, $250, more than half her monthly salary. All her savings. One to Seattle, she said, sliding her passport under the glass. The next available one. The ticket clerk, a tired-looking woman with nicotine-stained fingers, gave her an indifferent glance. There's one for tomorrow, coach class, upper berth, 2:30. Should I hold it? Vera counted out the money with a pounding heart. That was it, a one-way ticket to nowhere, to a man who might have already forgotten her. Or maybe not. Inside the envelope she still clutched was that single line with the blurred letters, if you ever find yourself up this way, come visit. Cold Creek Settlement, North Slope County, 600 kilometers from Fairbanks. And she would go, even if it meant crossing half the country by train, bus, and whatever ride she could find. Even if, at the edge of the world, all that awaited her was disappointment. Even if it was madness. Because in Chicago, there was nothing left for her. But out there, beyond the endless rails and frozen roads, maybe, just maybe, there was something real. The snow outside the train window blurred into a continuous white streak that made her eyes ache. Vera rubbed the bridge of her nose and turned a page of the backie. The letters danced before her. 3 days on the train, her whole world had shrunk to the rhythm of wheels, the smell of sausages, and strangers' voices through the thin partition. For the first time in her life, she traveled farther than the suburbs of Chicago or Indianapolis. A train to Seattle, foreign, unknown space, where she felt like a ship captain setting sail for open water. Fear and excitement mixed in equal measure, just like in the Greek tragedies she had studied in college. The woman across from her, plump, kind eyes, a motherly face, got off in Minneapolis, leaving behind a whiff of vanilla perfume and a half-eaten cookie on the table. Now Vera had the compartment to herself and savored the silence. In her head echoed her parents' voices. Where are you going? To the end of the world? Why? What if you don't make it? Her reply, uncharacteristically firm, it's my life. There was an English teacher position in Seattle, a 6-month replacement job. She'd stumbled upon the ad in an old newspaper left on a library windowsill. A sign, she thought. A chance to break free from her parents' control and prove, to them and to herself, that her useless degree actually meant something. The compartment door slid open, revealing a neatly combed gray head. Mind if I join you? The older man smiled, showing large, slightly yellow teeth. Samuel Peterson, headed to Seattle. He wore a light beige suit that didn't quite fit, too loose in the shoulders, too short in the sleeves. His tie, covered in tiny pink flowers, looked absurd against the plain background. He smelled of Old Spice, the same cologne her father used on holidays. Go ahead, Vera said politely, sliding closer to the window. Long trip? He asked. Seattle. Wow. Visiting family? For work. She hoped the short answers would discourage him, but Gordon, that was his name, looked at her with that particular hunger of a lonely man starved for conversation. I'm heading to Seattle too, to see my daughter. 15 years since we last met. Can you believe it? After the divorce. She's married now, has a little boy, Michael. She sent me a photo. He reached for his briefcase, and Vera quickly lifted her book higher, creating a barrier between herself and her talkative seatmate. Sorry, I really need to work. Gordon froze. Hurt flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by a servile smile. Of course, I understand. He fell silent, drumming his fingers on the table and sneaking glances at the cover of her book. So are you a student? Smart, I bet. Irritation flared inside her. She shouldn't have answered at all, just ignored him. But the words slipped out. I'm preparing for lessons. I need to focus. Please. She stood abruptly, grabbed her book, and slipped out into the corridor. Guilt mixed with relief. Maybe she'd been rude, but was she really obligated to listen to every stranger's life story? Not now, not when her nerves were already stretched thin and the road ahead was so uncertain. A woman should be polite, yes, but she doesn't have to be a shoulder for every lonely soul to cry on. The dining car greeted her with the smell of fried onions and cigarette smoke. The passengers at the tables had the worn faces of people who'd been on the road too long. A heavy-set waitress in a faded apron moved between them. Vera flipped through the laminated menu card. Soup, $3.50. Meat patty, $5. Cheap by Chicago standards, yet high for her dwindling budget. She ordered only tea and caught the knowing look in the waitress's eyes. She'd seen plenty like Vera, students and clerks who never ordered a full meal. The tea was too sweet and already cold. Vera stirred it absently, thinking about Gordon. What drives someone to strike up conversations with strangers? Desperate loneliness? A need to impress? Or just a simple hunger for human warmth? At the far end of the car, the door opened, and a few brave souls, mostly men with cigarettes, headed out to smoke between cars. Vera paid for her tea and, on impulse, walked in the opposite direction, to the observation car at the very end of the train. Few passengers ever went there, especially in winter. It was cold, uncomfortable, but private. The car was almost empty. A draft whistled between the seats, and the windows were fogged from the temperature difference. Vera settled by the window, wrapping her thin sweater tighter, and opened the baccy again, the story of Pentheus, torn apart by his own mother in a frenzy of madness sent by Dionysus. An ancient tale of punishment for pride and blindness. She didn't notice when someone sat across from her. Only when she felt his gaze did she look up. A man, mid-30s at most. Dark hair streaked with early gray, a weathered face with faint lines around the eyes. Deep brown eyes, calm but tired. In his hands, a worn paperback. Mind if I sit here? His voice was low, slightly hoarse. I'll be quiet. Vera nodded, relieved. This one wouldn't force conversation. There are people whose silence feels natural, never awkward. They sat like that for almost an hour. Outside, the world rushed by, snow-covered fields, sparse groves, tiny towns, 3 houses and a store proudly labeled groceries. America, vast, indifferent, stretched before them like an open book. Vera glanced at him sideways, curious to read the title of his book. Carms. Strange choice for someone with such a serious face. His hands, holding the paperback, were strong, calloused, with a few faint scars. The train began to slow. Vera looked out the window, a tiny stop in the woods, not even a proper station, just a log cabin dusted with snow. The signboard was barely visible through the swirling flakes. 15-minute stop, the conductor announced, poking his head into the car. Smoke break for anyone who needs it. Going out? Her neighbor asked, standing up. Vera shook her head. She was wearing only a thin sweater and jeans, not exactly the right outfit for a walk in the freezing air. No warm clothes. He nodded, understanding. I'll be right back. The car emptied out. Vera watched through the window as passengers stepped onto the snowy platform, some to smoke, some to stretch their legs, some just to gulp down the biting cold air. At the edge of the platform, she spotted Gordon, beige suit, ridiculous floral tie. He stood hunched over, staring down the tracks. The train gave a low rumble, preparing to move. Passengers began to climb back on board. Gordon didn't move. Vera frowned. She almost knocked on the window, then stopped herself. After all, it wasn't her business. He was an adult, responsible for his own choices. The train began to move, picking up speed. The lone figure of Gordon vanished from sight, swallowed by the curve of the track. A minute later, a violent jolt, the screech of brakes, the metallic clash of wheels grinding against steel. Vera grabbed the handrail to keep from falling. Her book hit the floor. Startled cries echoed through the car, hurried footsteps of conductors, frantic voices crackling over the radio. What happened? Her seatmate returned, snow melting on his shoulders. I don't know. Rumors spread quickly through the cars. Someone had jumped under the train. A conductor claimed he'd seen a man in a light-colored suit walk along the tracks and disappear around the bend. The engineer spotted him too late. The air around Vera thickened like before a storm. Gordon. The beige suit. The ridiculous floral tie. The man she'd refused to talk to. Something clenched inside her, a hard knot of guilt and fear. It didn't make logical sense, but somehow her coldness toward him now felt fatal. Her memory flashed with fragments, the hurt in his eyes, his tense fingers gripping the worn briefcase, his slumped shoulders on the platform. 15 years without seeing his daughter, traveling with a photo of his grandson in his bag. And she, Vera, couldn't spare him even a minute. She had cut him off, as if slicing away something useless. She jumped up, the world spinning darkly around her. Pushing past the frightened passengers toward the exit, she wanted only to reach the bathroom, to hide, to breathe, to survive the surge of panic. But a line of pale, shaken people already waited there. Vera froze in the vestibule, clutching her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The icy metal wall burned her back. A scream pulsed in her throat, one she couldn't let out. Are you all right? Her seatmate from the observation car stood before her. How had he appeared here? He looked at her closely, without intrusive pity. You knew him? The calm steadiness in his voice made her answer. No. I mean, he tried to talk to me, and I. The words spilled out in a torrent, hurried, broken. About Gordon, his desperate need to talk, how she'd cut him off, how she'd seen him later on the platform. How maybe, if she'd only listened. The stranger stayed silent, not interrupting, not trying to console her. When her voice finally faded, he said quietly, Come on. It's cold here. And she followed him like a child, without asking why. The dining car was almost empty. The waitress, bleary-eyed and shaken, brought them tea and a few slices of bread, the only food left. Vera held the cup in both hands, trying to stop trembling. It wasn't the cold, it was the realization that, in some terrible way, she felt responsible for another person's death. It's my fault, she said, staring into the dark liquid. If I'd only talked to him. You really think a 5-minute conversation could have saved a man's life? There was no judgment or irony in his voice, just a question. I don't know, but I could have at least not pushed him away, not made him feel like he didn't matter. A person who decides to end his life doesn't do it because of a single encounter, he said quietly. That decision grows for years, like a tree that slowly dies from within. How do you know that? I've seen it. The train rocked gently over a junction. Night thickened outside, and in the dark glass their reflections appeared, two strangers, side by side in the wake of another's tragedy. They talked for hours, maybe more, while the train sat on a sidetrack, waiting for the investigation to finish. They spoke about guilt and forgiveness, free will and fate, about how life is like a Greek tragedy, where the hero himself walks the path that leads to ruin. You have to forgive yourself for not saving a stranger, he said, otherwise that guilt will eat you alive. And you? Do you forgive yourself? Vera asked, for the first time wondering who he really was. He paused, looking out the window. My wife, Linda. 9 years ago, she was in a car accident on the highway near Fairbanks. I wasn't there. I was working. His fingers tightened around the cup. Now she's in a hospital in Anchorage. Completely paralyzed. She doesn't recognize me, doesn't speak. The doctors say it could stay that way for years. And you've lived with that for 9 years? I have. I visit every 3 months. Pay for her treatment. My son's growing up with my mother-in-law in Juneau. It's better for him there. A mining camp isn't a place for a child. He gave a faint shrug, almost apologetic. I've gotten used to it. It's just another kind of life, you know? Vera didn't know. She couldn't imagine living for years with that kind of weight, without breaking, without hating the world. I'm Gabe, he said at last, extending his hand across the table. Gabe Rowe, geologist. Vera Sloan, teacher. His hand was warm and rough. I'm going to Seattle, to teach at a school. And I'm heading to Anchorage, to my wife. Then back to the mine. That was how they met, in a rattling dining car, over cups of cooling tea, under the lingering shadow of Gordon. The train moved again long after midnight. Most passengers, exhausted from the delay, had fallen asleep in their compartments. Vera couldn't. She shivered, her temples throbbing with pain. Come on, Gabe said suddenly. I want to show you something. They went to the empty observation car. The cold bit through her sweater, But she didn't dare return for her jacket. She couldn't face the sight of Gordon's empty seat. "Look up," Gabe said, pointing toward the glass ceiling. Vera lifted her head and froze. Above the endless forest stretched a sky so clear, so blindingly bright with stars it seemed unreal. They glittered so close she could almost touch them. This she couldn't find the words. She had never seen such a sky. In Chicago, the stars vanished behind streetlights and neon signs. "Orion," Gabe said, pointing. "See the 3 stars in a row? That's his belt. And there with Big Dipper. And that bright one, that's Polaris." "I know the Greek myths about these constellations," Vera whispered. "Orion was a hunter, blinded for his arrogance, but later he regained his sight when he looked upon the rising sun." She told him about Cassiopeia, punished for her vanity, about King Cepheus and his wife, who offered their daughter to a sea monster, about Andromeda, chained to a rock, awaiting death. "And who saved her?" Gabe asked, his gaze still fixed on the sky. "Perseus. But that's a long story. You'll tell me someday?" "All right." They sat in silence, staring upward. Vera felt a strange calm wash over her for the first time in what felt like forever. The grief over Gordon hadn't vanished, but it had softened, as if the stars themselves had absorbed some of her pain. "Life is longer than one mistake," Gabe said suddenly, repeating the words he'd told her in the dining car. "You'll understand that one day." The train arrived in Minneapolis at dawn. The platform was wrapped in a bluish mist, the streetlights glowing dimly, as if through frosted glass. "This is my stop," Gabe said, standing in the vestibule with a small travel bag. "The train to Anchorage runs only once a week." "Thank you," Vera said softly, unsure how to express what she felt. "For last night. For the conversation. Don't mention it." They stood there awkwardly, not knowing what else to say. Then Gabe pulled a crumpled notebook from his jacket pocket, tore out a page, and handed it to her. "Write your address. In Seattle." Vera wrote down the name of the school where she'd be working, the only address she had. Gabe handed her another piece of paper. "This is the mine's address. I'm there from April to November. You can write if you ever want to." The final boarding call echoed through the car. The sleepy conductor appeared at the far end of the aisle. Gabe stepped toward the exit, then turned back suddenly, as if remembering something. Their kiss was brief and clumsy, a soft brush of lips, the faint scent of coffee and sleep, his hand tightening gently on her shoulder. Vera wanted to say something meaningful, about the stars, about guilt, about how she had never met anyone like him, but the words wouldn't come. The train started moving, carrying her away toward Seattle, toward the unknown. Gabe stood on the platform, a dark silhouette against the pale dawn sky. She watched until he vanished around the curve, and only then realized she was still clutching the paper with his address. A torn notebook page, the uneven handwriting. Words that would change her life. Gabe Rowe, Golden Dawn Mine, Cold Creek Settlement, North Slope County, Alaska. The letter on her lap was worn and fragile, the paper thinning along the folds, the ink fading into soft blurs. Vera smoothed it carefully, though she could already recite every word by heart. Outside the window, the Rocky Mountains drifted by the gray, stony slopes covered in sparse spruce that slowly gave way to the vast northern forest. She had the compartment to herself, a rare stroke of luck in the height of summer travel. Maybe it was the aura of reckless determination that kept other passengers away. Or maybe the stars had aligned just so. The stars. Gabe had written about them in his letter. "The polar night just ended here, and I thought of you. Remember how we watched the stars?" Vera closed her eyes. She remembered. The icy observation car, the constellations above the taiga, his calm voice describing the North Star. How long ago had that been? 6 months. A lifetime. And now she was heading north again, not to Seattle this time, but farther still, to the place where the forest met the sky, where in winter the sun never rose and in summer never set. To the man who had written her the shortest, most important letter of her life. She used to laugh at women who gave up everything for a man, thought of them as pathetic, spineless. And now here she was, rattling through the country in a worn train car, her savings gone, jobless, ticket one way, clinging to a fading hope. What was she doing? Traveling thousands of miles to see a man she'd spoken with for only one night, and not even a night, really. Just a few hours in a dining car, 100 words, and 2 hastily written addresses. He had a paralyzed wife. He lived on a mining camp, in conditions she could only imagine. I've gone insane, Vera thought, not without a trace of pleasure. There was something intoxicating in that madness, the taste of freedom. At 24, her life had always followed the rules: parents, college, a thesis, vague dreams of teaching at a university. A straight line, drawn by someone else's hand. But now the line had curved, veering into the unknown. And though fear chilled her from the inside, something deeper, stronger than fear, pulsed with the quiet joy of discovery. The compartment door slid open, and Vera flinched. A short, heavy-set woman in her 60s stood there, with chestnut-dyed hair and a big shopping bag. "Mind if I join you, dear?" Her voice was soft, husky with a smoker's rasp. "Not at all. Where are you headed? And you?" "To Fairbanks," Vera said, moving closer to the window. "Oh." The woman lowered herself onto the seat with a sigh. "Visiting family?" "No, a friend. He's a geologist there." Her companion smiled knowingly, but kindly, without judgment. "My name's Gail. I used to teach literature in Seattle, 35 years in the classroom. Hard to believe. Now I'm retired. Just came back from visiting my daughter in Chicago. Got to see the grandkids." Vera introduced herself, feeling an unexpected relief at meeting another teacher, even a retired one. Conversation flowed easily, about teaching, about modern kids, about books no one reads anymore. Nothing personal, only professional things. Gail talked about Alaska, about its harsh winters and rugged beauty, and Vera listened, trying to imagine what awaited her even farther north. "It's a hard land," Gail said, pouring tea from her thermos into plastic cups. "But pure. Like fire, it can burn you, but it can also cleanse you. People there are different. They don't waste words. If they say they'll do something, they do it. Otherwise, they stay quiet." "Do many women go there?" Vera asked carefully, taking the warm cup. "From the lower states, I mean." Gail smiled again, this time a little sadly. "Oh, they go, sweetheart. Some follow their husbands. Some chase money. Some are running from the past. Many don't last. The North isn't just beauty and romance, it's 50 below winters, clouds of mosquitoes in summer, and a loneliness so deep you could howl at the moon. Polar night in winter, barely 5 hours of daylight. White nights in summer, no sleep, nerves frayed to bits." Vera pressed Gabe's letter in her pocket. None of that was in his words. But why would it be? That was his everyday life. You don't warn visitors from the tropics that it snows in the north. "And you?" She hesitated. "Do you know the North Slope area? There's a mine near a place called Cold Creek." "I haven't been there, but I've heard of it," Gail said, squinting. "So you're going to your geologist, then? For a visit, or for good?" "I don't know," Vera admitted honestly. Gail was quiet for a long time, watching the forest slide past the window. Then she sighed. "Northern love stories rarely end well, dear. But sometimes they do. My daughter Lena met her husband while working on the pipeline project. He was a driller, she was a doctor on the team. 20 years together now. 3 kids." In those simple words, Vera heard more hope than in all the philosophy books she'd ever read. Seattle greeted her with the scent of sun-warmed wooden piers and an unexpected sense of home. Old Victorian houses stood shoulder to shoulder with stone mansions and modern buildings. The Puget Sound stretched wide and deep blue, a shade Chicago's waters never had. Her bus to Fairbanks left in 4 hours, so Vera decided to explore the city. She left her backpack in a storage locker and wandered through the historic center. Pike Street, wide, bustling, full of tourists, offered the cool refuge of shaded storefronts. She found a bookstore in the basement of an old brick building. Descending the worn steps, she pushed open the door, and a small bell jingled. The air smelled of paper dust, shelves climbed up to the ceiling under dim light. "Can I help you?" an elderly bookseller asked, looking up from his newspaper. "Just browsing," she said, but then, on impulse, added, "Do you have anything on ancient mythology?" "Got a few," he said, leading her deeper into the shop. "History section, over here, Greece, Rome." Her eyes fell on an old edition with a faded spine, Apollodorus, the Library of Mythology. The same book sat on her shelf back home in Chicago, the one she hadn't had time to pack. "How much?" $15. Vera opened her wallet, the last of her money. She still had to get to Fairbanks, and from there, to the mine. But something inside her whispered that this book had to come with her. A talisman, a thread tying her to her old life. A fragile link to that night under the stars, when she told Gabe the story of Perseus and Andromeda. "I'll take it," she said, handing over the bills. The bus to Fairbanks turned out to be an ancient Greyhound with sagging seats and a window that wouldn't close somewhere in the back. 20 hours on a road that barely deserved the name, potholes, mud, and ruts after every rain. Several times, the driver and his assistant stopped in the middle of the wilderness to tinker with the engine, drawing grumbles from tired passengers. Vera sat in the middle of the bus, wedged between a sweaty miner with a thick beard and a silent native man who clutched a bottle of some murky drink. The air inside was heavy, a suffocating mix of tobacco, alcohol, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of freshly crushed mosquitoes. Someone had a live chicken in a net bag, which squawked every few minutes, adding another note to the chaotic symphony of smells and sounds. Outside, the taiga stretched endlessly, vast, majestic, and utterly indifferent to human worries. Spruce, pine, and cedar trees wove together into a continuous green carpet that rolled all the way to the horizon. Now and then, rivers appeared, their names strange and impossible to pronounce: Tanana, Kayakuk, Yukon. Then came one so wide that the opposite bank disappeared, a silvery expanse blending into the sky. Vera pressed her forehead to the glass, trying to find the line where water met air. Infinity, she thought. That was what Chicago didn't have, this sense of endlessness, of being part of something bigger. There, everything was mapped out, divided, structured. Here, it was only raw nature, untouched and eternal, like in the myths she once studied. First there was chaos, and from it, cosmos was born. And here, she felt as if she were witnessing that birth. Fairbanks, the northern capital of Alaska, turned out to be a city of contrasts. Dilapidated wooden shacks stood beside yellow brick buildings and modern structures with gaudy signs. The Golden Nugget Casino gleamed in neon, beckoning the few who wandered by, while across the street the Alaska Theater looked like a miniature temple: columns, plaster ornaments, tribal patterns. Vera got off the bus exhausted, unwashed, her head buzzing from the long, bumpy ride. She had no money left for a hotel. Her last few dollars had gone to a sandwich and coffee on the road. She spent the night at the station, hard benches under flickering lights, constant announcements in 2 languages echoing through the hall, and grim-faced police officers pacing around, searching for loiterers. In the morning, after splashing icy water on her face in the restroom and pulling herself together, Vera set out to find a way to get to Cold Creek. The news wasn't good: no regular transportation, no buses. Only private drivers who charged ridiculous prices. On the bulletin board outside the station, she spotted a torn scrap of paper: to North Slope County, $50 a seat. No phone number. Apparently, passengers were expected to just show up. She walked around the parking lot, asking about North Slope. Most drivers either shook their heads or named sums that made her dizzy. Finally, one man, dark-skinned, with a face etched in deep lines, nodded. "Yeah, I'm going there. Name's Nick. Leaving today. 50 ahead." "I only have 30, Vera said honestly. "That's all I've got left." Nick gave her a long, assessing look. Then he shrugged. "All right, get in. I've got another passenger too. She's heading to Cold Creek as well. We leave in an hour." The woman turned out to be Darlene, a sturdy nurse in her 50s, with dyed red hair and a booming voice. She heaved her giant duffel into the pickup bed and climbed into the cab beside Vera. Nick started the engine in silence, crossed himself at the small St. Christopher medallion hanging from the rearview mirror, and pulled onto the road. "Praying for a safe trip?" Darlene teased. "When's the last time you went to church?" "Last year. For my mother's funeral," Nick muttered. "That was the last time." "I see," Darlene said simply. The Tiger rolled by outside, wilder and more untouched than anything near Seattle. Handcrafted wooden crosses marked accident sites along the road. Nick slowed for every turn, clearly wary of the treacherous terrain. Darlene lit a cigarette and cracked the window. The smoke drifted out in a thin line, dissolving in the cold air. "First time up north?" she asked Vera. "Yes." "Who are you going to see?" Vera hesitated. But what was there to hide? Soon enough, everyone in the village would know anyway. "Gabe Rowe," she said quietly. "I see," Darlene replied, blowing smoke through her nose. There was a long pause. "I know Gabe. Good man. You hear about Linda?" "I did," Vera said softly. "She's paralyzed, right?" Darlene gave her a strange look. "Was. She died 3 days ago. Funeral was yesterday." The world around Vera shrank to a single point, like railroad tracks converging in the distance. Died. 3 days ago. After 9 years of silence and stillness, her body finally gave up. "Gabe's been drinking ever since," Darlene went on, unaware of Vera's pale face. "Alice stayed with him for a bit, then left for Juneau. I guess she got fed up. Didn't think he'd take it so hard." "Alice?" Vera's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "His woman," Darlene explained. "Been together almost 2 years. She's an artist, knew all about Linda. Guess she didn't like how much he was grieving. Figured he loved his wife more than she thought. The forest outside blurred into green and gray. Vera stared straight ahead, afraid to turn her head, afraid Darlene might see the tears gathering in her eyes. Alice. Of course. How could she have imagined he'd been alone all this time, waiting for some stranger from a train half a continent away? The fragile story she'd been building in her mind for months crumbled like a house of cards. She was too late. It was all over before it ever began. Maybe Darlene noticed the silence, because her voice softened. Don't take it so hard, honey. We'll figure it out once we get there. Things have a way of settling down. Life's simple here, not like in your Chicago. The truck hit a deep rut, and Vera grabbed the door handle to keep from hitting her head. Ahead lay hundreds more miles, and Cold Creek, where a man named Gabe Rowe was mourning his wife, and maybe the woman who'd left him, or maybe just his own lost life. Mud clods flew from under the tires, splattering the windshield. Nick switched on the wipers from time to time, and for a few brief seconds the view cleared, the endless taiga stretching to the horizon, cold, indifferent, and breathtaking, like fate itself. The settlement of Cold Creek appeared suddenly, like a mirage. One moment there was nothing but forest, and then, wooden barracks sunken into the ground, a few two-story houses with peeling paint, the mine's office building with a faded flag hanging over the porch. A small store called Northern Lights, a leftover from the mining company days. A wooden community hall with a 3-year-old poster, a school with a dusty playground behind it. 300 souls lived here, not counting the seasonal workers. And all around, the taiga, the hills, the ringing streams, and the eternal summer light that danced across the horizon but never disappeared. The pickup stopped at a fork where the dirt road split, one path toward the mine, the other into the village. Nick turned to his passengers. End of the road. Darlene paid him, then helped Vera pull her backpack from the truck bed. The pickup rattled away, leaving them in a cloud of dust. Vera looked around. No city noise, just the whisper of the wind in the larch trees and a distant barking dog. Come on, Darlene said, heading down a narrow path between the houses. I'll take you to Gabe's, then I'm going home. I'm dead tired. They walked along the winding trail. Vera noticed the details, laundry on a line, an old pickup propped up on bricks, children flying a kite. Ordinary life at the edge of the world. The village looked lived in yet temporary, as if people here weren't living but waiting. Gabe's place is off to the side, Darlene explained. Built it himself when he moved here. Didn't want to live in the barracks. Said he liked the quiet. They turned onto a barely visible path leading into the woods. Around the bend stood a log house with a porch carved in intricate patterns, birds, animals, strange symbols. A white husky tied near the fence started barking furiously as they approached. A neat pile of firewood stood by the shed, and an old rain barrel glistened with water. The front door was ajar. Darlene climbed the steps confidently and pushed it open. Gabe, she called out. You've got visitors. No answer. They stepped inside. The house smelled of tobacco, stale smoke, and something else. Grief, Vera realized. That faint, heavy scent that lingers only in homes where loss has just passed through. The kitchen was a mess. Bottles, cigarette butts, plates with scraps of food. The stove was cold, footprints tracked across the floor. Well, there you go, Darlene sighed, looking around. He got drunk and wandered off somewhere. Come on, I'll take you to my place. You can stay the night, we'll figure things out in the morning. Vera slowly set her backpack on the floor. Everything inside her screamed, run, girl, just run. Anywhere. Back to Chicago, to Fairbanks, anywhere but here. You don't belong. But something else, deeper than fear, held her in place. I'll wait here, she said quietly. Darlene looked at her in surprise, then shrugged. Your call. But he might not come back soon. Probably went to make peace with Alice. She left, but they say she was still hanging around near the station. After Darlene left, Vera stood for a long time in the middle of the kitchen, listening to the silence, that unfamiliar, thick northern quiet. Then she rolled up her sleeves. If she was going to lose face, she'd do it with dignity. She wouldn't just sit here like a beggar among someone else's dirty dishes. She started washing plates, forks, glasses crusted with old liquor stains. Then she swept the floor, gathered the empty bottles into a trash bag, opened the windows to air out the rooms. Work always helped her calm down. There was something honest about it, simple, physical truth. You scrub, you clean, you put things in order. No philosophy, just motion. The house began to reveal itself to her. Simple but warm. The kitchen with a cold wood stove. A large living room lined with bookshelves across an entire wall. Vera ran her fingers along the spines. Shalamov, Platonov, Kalima Tales, Arsniev, Dersu a worn copy of Homer in an old edition. Books owned by someone who read not to impress, but because he couldn't live without it. The bedroom was tiny, just a bed and a nightstand. Photos on the wall, Gabe with a boy about 10, Arthur, probably. They were standing by a river, smiling with fishing poles in hand. A young woman with long blonde hair and an open, radiant smile, Linda, before the accident. And another photo, a group shot of Gabe with bearded men at the mining site, covered in mud but laughing like kids. Vera turned away. She had stepped into another person's life, one filled with its own joys and sorrows. What was she even doing here, in this remote place where everyone knew each other? Gabe had Alice. Linda was gone, yes, but he was grieving 9 years of love and loss. And she, Vera, who was she? A stranger from a train, a woman he'd once kissed goodbye. A foolish girl from Chicago, drunk on stories of fated love. In the cupboard she found some grains, oatmeal, buckwheat, rice. There was no electricity, maybe it had been cut off for non-payment or just another local outage. Vera lit the stove, found a pot, and cooked simple porridge with a pinch of salt. Then she filled a bowl with water for the dog. The white husky eyed her warily, then lapped up the water. When Vera gently reached out to stroke its head, it didn't flinch. A small victory. The sun hovered low above the horizon, refusing to set. The white night was brighter here than anywhere she'd ever been. A rosy light bathed the taiga, giving everything a dreamlike glow. It felt unreal, as if she'd stepped into one of the myths she used to study, as if she had crossed the Styx and found herself in a land of eternal day, beyond the reach of time. A padded jacket lay on the porch. Vera pulled it over her shoulders and sat on the steps, gazing out at the endless wilderness. Silence, absolute silence. No cars, no voices. Only the wind whispering through the branches and the steady breathing of the husky curled beside her. For the first time in her life, Vera was truly far from civilization. It was frightening and exhilarating. She took Apollodorus from her backpack, the one she'd bought in Seattle, and opened to the story of Perseus and Andromeda. She read by the light of the sleepless sun. Perseus, flying over Ethiopia, the land of Cepheus, saw Andromeda chained to a rock. Cassiopeia, the wife of Cepheus, had boasted that she was more beautiful than the Nereids, and they, angered by her pride, asked Poseidon to punish the land. He sent floods and a sea monster. The oracle declared the disaster would end only if Andromeda were sacrificed. So Cepheus, under pressure from his people, bound his daughter to the rock. When Perseus saw her, he fell in love and promised to slay the monster if he could have her hand in marriage. Vera closed the book. The story was as old as the earth, a girl in danger, a hero who saves her, love at first sight. But real life was never that simple. There were no heroes, no monsters, no gods to set things right. Only people, flawed, hurting, trying to build something real from the ruins of what was lost. Like her. Like Gabe. The house carried traces of different times. Aluminum pots beside birch bark containers. An old enamel kettle with faded flowers, a relic from the 70s. A broken radio on the wall, its wires cut. A calendar from 1998, yellowed with age. Back then, Linda had still been alive. They'd probably hung it together, marking birthdays and holidays. But there were newer things too, a cheap cassette player, a stack of tapes, Vysotsky, Tsoi. Books from recent years. A fresh copy of Alaska Gold News on the windowsill. Life had gone on, somehow. Vera ran her hand along the log wall, rough wood, resin, the scent of pine. Gabe had built this place himself, every beam fitted perfectly, every nail driven with care. A house made by a man who knew what he wanted. A house with a soul. Outside, an engine roared. Vera froze. Should she go meet whoever it was, or stay hidden? The dog barked joyfully. That meant only one thing, the owner. Her heart pounded in her throat. She smoothed her hair, tugged her sweater straight. What was she going to say? Hi, I came here. Or I'm sorry, I didn't know. Or maybe just I cleaned up a little. The motor sputtered off, but no one came inside. Vera stepped onto the porch and froze. By the gate stood a woman, thin, short dark hair, dressed in men's jeans and a rough wool sweater. A cigarette hung from her lips as she looked at Vera like she'd just spotted an alien landing on her front lawn. Who the hell are you? The woman asked, exhaling a plume of smoke. And what are you doing in Gabe's house? She turned out to be a neighbor from down the road, who'd stopped by to see if Gabe had come back. Seeing Vera, she was startled, but not for long. In a small settlement like this, news traveled faster than wind. She left soon after, and Vera was alone again with the house and its silence. The night passed in half-sleep. Vera curled up on the couch in the living room, unable to bring herself to lie on the bed. That felt too intimate, too intrusive. She covered herself with an old plaid blanket that smelled of pine and tobacco. The white night washed through the curtains, refusing to let true darkness fall, as if even nature wouldn't allow her to drift away. Through the haze of drowsiness she listened to the taiga, the creak of trees, the sigh of wind through the branches, faint rustles of unseen creatures. Sounds she'd only ever read about, now hauntingly real. Morning came quietly, the sun simply rose higher, flooding the room with gold. Vera woke on her own, as she always did, at 6 sharp. She washed with icy water, set a kettle on the stove she'd lit the night before, and sat down to wait. For what? She didn't know. A decision. Salvation. A miracle. Then came the distant rumble of an engine, tearing through the morning stillness. Vera froze, listening, like a dog catching the scent of home. The sound grew louder, rough, uneven, familiar. An old truck with broken shocks. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears. She stepped slowly out onto the porch. The truck stopped by the gate. The door creaked open, and a man jumped heavily to the ground, unshaven, gaunt, his jacket torn at the shoulder. Gabe. He looked up, and stopped dead when he saw her. The hand reaching for the gate froze midair. A long, endless silence stretched between them. Vera? Is it really you? His voice was hoarse, as if unused for days. Vera didn't answer. What could she possibly say? Gabe climbed the steps slowly, as though afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. Vera stood up. They faced each other, half a meter of air, half a year of life between them. He looked older. Deep lines carved from his nose to the corners of his mouth, more gray in his hair, shadows under his eyes. Grief and exhaustion had marked him. She had changed too, tanned from travel, her hair lightened by the southern sun, her gaze steadier, harder. No longer a student, no longer the hopeful academic. A woman who had made her choice. I didn't know about Linda, Vera said quietly. Darlene only told me yesterday. She died in her sleep, he said evenly. Doctors said she didn't suffer. I didn't make it in time, was out at the mine. No signal. He spoke without emotion, as if reciting a newspaper report. Only his fists, clenched until his knuckles turned white, betrayed the strain. Darlene says you have Alice. Vera spoke at last, forcing the dryness from her throat. Gabe looked straight into her eyes, a gaze so tired, it seemed endless. She was, he said quietly. For 2 years. She's a good woman. He leaned against the doorframe, as if his legs could no longer hold him. But when Linda died, I realized something. I didn't love Alice the way I should have. She figured it out before I did. Went to stay with her sister in Juneau. Told me to call when I got my head straight. I never did. The husky, who'd been silently watching them, walked over and pressed her nose against his hand. He absently petted her. Then why did you write to me? Vera asked, wrapping her arms around herself like a shield. Gabe ran a hand down his face, as if trying to wipe away the exhaustion that wouldn't go. Because that night on the train was real. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist. You understand? Real. I'm 37. Half my life's been spent in the taiga, the other half in hospitals next to a woman who didn't know who I was. I've got a son I see twice a year. And then, on that train, I met a girl who talked about Greek gods and cried for a stranger who'd thrown himself under a train. And I thought, that's life. Right there. Sitting next to me. And I let it go. There was no self-pity in his voice, just a simple truth, the kind that comes from people who've lived hard lives and don't expect mercy from the world. But Vera wouldn't be gentle. Too much fear, doubt, and hope had melted into determination over those 5 days of travel. And her voice trembled. I quit my job, spent every cent I had, rode 5 days across the country. For what? For a letter you wrote drunk? I wasn't drunk, Gabe said softly. I was alone. Polar night, you know? 4 months of darkness. It drives you crazy. He stared past her, toward the forest. I thought about you just to stay sane. Silence settled between them, thick and charged, like the air before a storm. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. A raven cried hoarsely from the larches. I can't be your salvation, Gabe, Vera said finally, calmer than she expected. I can barely hold myself together. I have no job, no home, no future. She took a deep breath, gathering her strength. I came because I was lonely too, and scared. There's no one waiting for me in Chicago. My parents want me to marry some gym teacher and forget all about the classics. But I can't. I won't. She paused, trying to find the right words. The thoughts that had seemed so clear yesterday were now tangled and slipping away. I thought maybe life could be different here. That in a place where you live on the edge, it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, only what you do now. It was all she had to say. Vera fell silent, feeling drained, emptied, as if every word she'd been carrying for 6 months had finally spilled out, leaving nothing behind but quiet. Gabe sank onto the porch step, hunching forward, his hands gripping his head. Vera saw the streaks of gray in his dark hair, the tension in his shoulders beneath the worn jacket. "Maybe you're right," he muttered. "Maybe I'm selfish. But I'm glad you came. I really am." He lifted his eyes to her, and for the first time, they were alive again, with a flicker of something that looked like hope. "Even if you decide to turn around and leave." Vera sat beside him, feeling the warmth radiating from his shoulder. A long silence wrapped around them like a cocoon, not heavy, but necessary, like the pause between two musical notes, without which the melody loses its meaning. Then she gently rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Then, after a beat, added, "At least not yet." He let out a quiet, rough laugh, the kind of laugh that comes from someone who's forgotten how. "Fair enough." They sat like that for a long time. The dog lay down at Gabe's feet, head resting on her paws. Birds sang in the taiga. Life went on, merciless and beautiful. "You know," Gabe said suddenly, "when I first got here, before the accident, there were about 350 people living here. Now maybe 200, if that. After the crash, a lot of mines shut down. Folks had nowhere to go, nothing to do with their hands. Those who could, left for the cities. The rest drank themselves to death. Some towns just died out completely. People walked away from their houses, their furniture, everything. Took only their papers and whatever they could carry." He looked toward the horizon. "Cold Creek's still holding on. As long as there's gold, it'll stay. But how long will that last? The geologists say maybe 10 more years. Then you have to dig deeper, new tech, new money. I don't know if anyone will invest." He spoke of Alaska, the deadly winter roads where people still vanish every year, the ghost towns where furniture still stands and photographs still hang on the walls. Of the people who remained, tough, quiet souls who helped when needed but never asked for help themselves. He wanted her to know where she'd come, to understand. "And how do you survive all this?" Vera asked. "Books," Gabe said simply. "You saw the shelves in the house? That's my salvation. And work, of course. When you're chasing gold, you don't have time for useless thoughts. And my son. I go to Juneau twice a year to see him. He's older now, understands things, doesn't blame me for being gone so often. It was hard on him, with his mom." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Hard on my mother-in-law too. She raised him. A good woman, fair. She never blamed me, though she could have. I was the one driving when it happened." The words hung in the air, heavy with pain that 9 years hadn't dulled. Vera couldn't answer. Any words would have sounded false. "We were driving slow," Gabe went on, his voice low. "We just settled here. Linda had found work at the clinic. Arthur was 3, just learning to talk. Then, 1 second. Screeching brakes, grinding metal. And that was it. The end of one life, the start of another. I nearly lost my mind that first year. Drank. Then realized I couldn't keep doing that. I had a son. Linda in the hospital. I had to keep going. So I did." He spoke without self-pity, just quiet acceptance. Like a man who's learned to take life as it comes, with all its cruelty, randomness, and indifference to human plans. And in that calm, there was more strength than in any talk of heroism. In that moment, Vera understood why she hadn't left yesterday, after learning about Alice, about Linda. Why she'd stayed, washed the dishes, cooked porridge, fed the dog. Because in this simple man, in his plain words and unpretentious decency, there was something real. Something she had been missing in Chicago, among clever conversations, career goals, and endless efforts to seem like someone she wasn't. "Let's go inside," Gabe said, standing. "You must be hungry. I am too. Can't even remember the last time I ate." They stepped back into the house, and Vera suddenly realized this strange life at the edge of the world no longer frightened her. It was uncertain, yes. Tomorrow was unknown. But in that uncertainty, oddly enough, was hope. Time in Cold Creek moved differently. Not by clocks or calendars, but by the sun, which in summer barely touched the horizon, and in winter barely rose above it. By hunting seasons and mining shifts. By rare holidays and the occasional mail helicopter. Vera didn't grasp that rhythm right away. For the first week after her arrival, she woke up anxious, feeling like she'd overslept, missed something important. Then she realized, time here flowed like a river, impossible to rush, only to follow. Her small room in Gabe's house became her refuge, a bed, a nightstand, a shelf of books, a simple wooden hook for clothes. Gabe insisted on giving her a separate room, not out of propriety, but out of respect. It's a small town, he'd explained. Everyone knows everything. No reason to feed the gossip. Vera understood it wasn't just about propriety. There were two people with burned wings, not ready to rush toward closeness. There was too much still to learn about each other, too many old wounds that needed at least to be acknowledged, if not healed. Work came faster than she expected. The school principal, a short, withered woman with sharp, attentive eyes, listened to Vera's story about her education in Chicago, skimmed through her resume, and finally nodded. Margaret's leaving for Portland to visit her sister. Can you handle English and literature? I can, Vera answered, though she had never taught those subjects before. But she didn't have a choice. How many students? 15 total, grades 1 through 9. We have to combine classes, there's no other way. Teaching turned out to be harder than she thought. At first, the kids didn't listen. The teacher from Chicago seemed like a temporary outsider, someone who wouldn't stay long enough to care or demand much. But Vera found her rhythm. She reached the older ones through respect for their knowledge of local life, the younger ones through stories and games, and the middle grades through simple honesty. She didn't pretend to be anyone she wasn't. She didn't act like an exotic city visitor, but she also didn't try to blend in. She just did what she knew best, opening the world of words and stories, encouraging curiosity, never shaming anyone for not knowing. And the kids warmed to her, slowly at first, then with growing trust. Katie, an 8th grader and the foreman's daughter, admitted she wrote poetry. The 3rd grade twins, Mike and Greg, brought her strange bugs and tiny forest birds to add to her smart book. The sullen 9th grader Dennis, a boy with a hard life, suddenly showed interest in Greek myths. You'll leave one day, he said to her after class. Like everyone else. Maybe, Vera replied without denying it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try while we're here. Evenings became the most precious part of her days. When lessons and chores were done, and Gabe returned from the mine smelling of pine, machine oil, and that faint metallic dust that clung to his clothes, it was their time. They'd sit in the kitchen under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. Electricity in the village came on by schedule, 3 hours in the morning, 3 in the evening, so they learned to live by the rhythm of light and quiet. Gabe usually did the talking, Vera listened, asking only now and then. He spoke of the taiga, not like a city dreamer, but like a man for whom the forest was home. About the tracks different animals left in the snow. About signs in the sky that foretold weather. About the work at the mine, the men he worked with, the lone prospectors who still roamed the streams looking for gold. About surviving when the temperature dropped below -50 and the nearest hospital was 400 kilometers away. People get used to everything, he'd say. Cold, loneliness, the only thing you can't get used to is meaninglessness. That's why the ones who stay here are those who found something that gives their life purpose. For some, it's gold. For others, it's freedom. For others, running from their past. And you? Vera asked once. Gabe was silent for a long time, staring at his rough hands, darkened by years of work, lined with tiny scars. I don't know, he said finally. It used to be Linda. I couldn't leave her. Now it's different. Sometimes Vera read aloud. Homer, Sophocles, sometimes Chekhov, and his words felt especially alive in that small kitchen, broken only by the crackle of the lamp wick and Gabe's steady breathing. He listened with his eyes closed, and in those moments his face softened, grew younger, as if the hard edges life had carved into him momentarily eased. They didn't rush. Even in conversation they moved carefully, avoiding slippery subjects, not yet ready to speak about the deepest things. Gabe never asked about her past or her plans. Vera never asked about Linda or Alice. They both gave each other space, and that silent promise, I'm not going anywhere. Their first real kiss happened 2 weeks later. They had gone to the creek for water, the pump in the village had broken again, and everyone carried buckets. The evening was warm, the mosquitoes quiet, the air full of the faint, sweet scent of blooming wild rosemary. Vera slipped on the wet stones, and Gabe caught her. For a moment they stood so close they could feel each other's breath. He kissed her gently, like he was afraid to startle her, just the softest touch. Then he pulled back, searching her face for an answer. Was it all right? Too soon? Vera leaned toward him, wrapping her arms around his neck. His hands, uncertain at first, settled on her back, drawing her closer. The kiss was long, tender, with the taste of silence, the kind that exists only deep in the wilderness, far from people. "Let's go home," Gabe said hoarsely when they finally parted. "Water's not going to carry itself." They walked back side by side, not touching, but feeling the warmth between them. The buckets splashed over the rims, leaving dark wet patches along the path. At the gate, Gabe set them down. "I'm not rushing you," he said, meeting her gaze. "You know that." "I know," Vera answered. And in that short exchange there was more tenderness than in 1,000 love declarations. In July, Gabe went to Juneau to pick up his son. Arthur spent summers with his grandmother but was coming for a month-long visit. Vera was nervous. What would the boy think of this strange woman in their home? Would he resent her? Reject her? She scrubbed and washed everything, linens, floors, windows polished to a shine with vinegar. She baked a cloudberry pie. The berries had just ripened, and she'd gone to the marshes with the neighbor girls to pick them. The boys in the village shook their heads, amused. All that fuss for a kid? But the women understood. Gabe and Arthur arrived in the evening, dropped off by a friend with a rugged SUV. Vera stepped onto the porch and froze, unsure how to act. Arthur was tall for 12, all angles and seriousness. He looked like his father, same eyes, same brows, even the same careful, deliberate movements. "Hi," Vera said. "I'm Vera." "Hello." The boy shook her hand solemnly. "Dad told me about you. He said you're smart and kind, and that you're a teacher." Arthur took off his sneakers and lined them neatly by the door. "Wow, you made pie. What kind?" "Cloudberry. It's a northern berry, looks like a raspberry, only orange." "I know. Dad and I used to pick them." He smiled then, a real, bright smile that washed the seriousness off his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Never had it in a pie before." At dinner, they talked about school in Juneau, Arthur's friends, his hockey team. He spoke calmly, without showing off, but with quiet confidence. Gabe listened attentively, asking questions now and then. Their bond was obvious, deep and steady, built on trust and respect despite the distance between their visits. "Is it true you know ancient languages?" Arthur asked suddenly, turning to Vera. "Yes. Latin and ancient Greek, and a bit of Old Church Slavonic, but that one's not quite ancient," she smiled. "Will you teach me?" "Latin?" Vera glanced at Gabe, surprised. He was smiling, genuinely, openly, perhaps for the first time since she'd met him. "Of course," she said, "if you want to learn." "I do." Arthur nodded seriously. "Grandma says Latin is the foundation of all sciences, and if I want to be a doctor, I should know it." "So you want to be a doctor?" Vera asked softly, suddenly understanding. "Yes, to help people, like Mom couldn't." Their Latin lessons became a ritual. Every morning Arthur would come to Vera's room with a notebook, listening intently as she explained. He was quick, sharp, his memory keen, his logic mature. Soon they moved from simple phrases to real texts. Vera found a copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses in the library and read to him about humans turned into animals, trees, stars. Arthur followed every word, eyes fixed on her finger tracing the lines. "Do you believe people can change into something else?" Arthur asked one day. "Into animals?" "No." "Then what do you mean?" "Something different." Vera thought for a moment. "I think so, yes. People change on the inside. They become someone else. Sometimes better, sometimes worse." "Like Dad," Arthur nodded. "Grandma says after Mom's accident, he became completely different. He used to be funny." "Do you remember your mom, before she got hurt?" Vera asked gently. Arthur shook his head. "I was 3 when it happened. I barely remember her from back then. Grandma shows me pictures, but it feels like someone else. I saw her in the hospital, and then at the funeral, and I didn't feel anything." "That's bad, isn't it?" Vera looked into his serious eyes, so much like Gabe's, only without that hardened crease life leaves after years of struggle. "No," she said softly. "It's normal. Memory can't hold what never really happened." She paused, searching for the right words. "You know, I think what matters most isn't remembering, it's knowing. And you know about your mom. You know who she was, what she loved, what she dreamed about. That's what counts." Arthur studied her for a long time, as if testing the truth in her words. Then he nodded. "Yeah, maybe. The main thing is remembering that she was. And now you're here." There was no reproach in his tone, only quiet acceptance, the kind of wisdom that shouldn't belong to a 12-year-old. Alice showed up unexpectedly at the end of July. She knocked on the door early in the morning, when Gabe was already at the mine and Arthur was still asleep. Vera opened it, not realizing who was standing on the porch. Hi, said the woman, about 30, slim, with short dark hair and a sharp, assessing look. You must be Vera. I'm Alice. They stared at each other for several seconds, two women connected by one man, but in completely different ways. Come in, Vera said finally, stepping aside. Gabe's not here, he's at the mine until evening. I know. Alice entered and glanced around. Clean in here. Wasn't like that when I lived here. There was no venom in her words, just a touch of irony. She walked into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and lit a cigarette with the ease of someone who'd done it there 1,000 times before, which, in fact, she had. Tea? Vera asked, feeling the strangeness of the moment. Sure. Strong, if you've got it. They stayed silent while the kettle boiled. Then Alice stubbed out her cigarette and looked straight at Vera. So, you're the one from the train. He talked about you for 6 months. I thought he made you up. He didn't, Vera replied, pouring tea into mugs. I'm real. I see that, Alice said with a faint smirk. Just not what I expected. I thought you'd be different. Different how? I don't know. Like someone from a movie. A Chicago socialite or something. But you're normal. Vera didn't know whether that was an insult or a compliment, but she decided to take it as the latter. I came to get my stuff, Alice said, taking a sip of tea. I left some things here, a camera, a few albums, clothes. Gabe knows, I called the office yesterday. I heard you're an artist. Sort of, Alice shrugged. I make installations out of natural materials, driftwood, stones, moss, bones. Had an exhibit in Portland once, even got a small award. Doesn't pay the bills, though. Just then they heard footsteps, Arthur coming down the stairs, sleepy and tousled. When he saw Alice, his face lit up. Aunt Alice. Hey, kiddo. She ruffled his hair. Look at you. You've grown. 6 centimeters this year, Arthur said proudly. Wow. You'll be taller than your dad soon. Go wash up. I brought you some treats. They're in the bag by the door. Arthur dashed upstairs again, and Alice turned back to Vera. Good kid, she said softly. Smart and kind, like his mom. Stubborn as hell, like his dad. She paused, staring into her mug. So, Gabe said you're staying? Or what? I don't know yet, Vera admitted honestly. I see. Alice walked to the window, pulled out another cigarette but didn't light it, just rolled it between her fingers. Listen, I'm not your enemy. I just want to know, are you serious, or just here to play around? This isn't Chicago. You can't just leave when you get bored. People remember things here. Vera thought how many times she'd already heard that warning in the last 2 weeks. Maybe Northerners really did believe city people couldn't be trusted. I don't know what's next, she said quietly, but I'm not playing. Alice studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Then take care of him. He's strong, but not endlessly strong. For 9 years, he's been burning himself up with loyalty. He's earned the right to be happy. It was the last thing Vera expected, not jealousy, not mockery, but a kind of weary, almost maternal concern for the man Alice clearly still loved. Just not in the way she once thought she did. And that realization made Vera see her in a new light. Thank you, Vera said softly. Alice waved it off and finally lit her cigarette. Don't mention it. Arthur returned, holding a wooden toy in his hands, and the tension in the room dissolved. The three of them had breakfast together, and afterward Alice began packing her things. Vera helped, carefully wrapping the odd assortment of objects, twisted roots, flat river stones, dried branches coiled like spirals. These are for your work? Vera asked, wrapping what looked like a fragment of moose antler in newspaper. Yeah, Alice nodded. I make installations out of them. Here, look. She pulled a few photographs from her bag. They showed strange, mesmerizing structures made from natural materials, something between modern art and shamanic altars. Figures that seemed to grow straight out of the ground, arches of wood and stone, delicate suspended shapes floating in the air. Beautiful, Vera said sincerely. It reminds me of ancient Greek sculpture, that same connection with nature, with the material itself, as if the marble was birthing the form on its own. Seriously? For the first time, Alice looked at her with genuine interest. Tell me more. So Vera told her about Phidias and Praxiteles, how the Greek sculptors chose their stone, how they searched for the soul within it, how they brought life out of the lifeless. Alice listened, taking slow drags from her cigarette, nodding thoughtfully. That's cool, she said. I never thought of it that way. You have books about that? I'll find some. I'll send them to you. That'd be great. Alice tore off a scrap of paper and wrote down her address in Juneau. Here. And write me sometime, will you? Just so I know how things are going. I will, Vera promised, tucking the address into her pocket. When Gabe returned that evening, Alice was gone. She'd caught a ride out with someone passing through. But the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from its walls. The three of them had dinner together, and Arthur chattered about the gifts Alice had brought. Gabe listened and smiled. And Vera caught herself thinking that they looked like a family, an odd, imperfect one, but a real family all the same. Writing to her parents in Springfield wasn't easy. Vera started the letter 3 times, tearing up the pages each time, unsure how to explain the unexplainable, how to put into words a choice she hadn't yet fully understood herself. In the end, she wrote simply, I'm teaching at a school up north. It's unbelievably beautiful here. I met someone, a good man. I'm happy. I'll come home in winter and tell you everything. Not exactly the truth, but not a lie either. She was happy, in a fragile, tentative way that she was afraid to scare off even by admitting it to herself. In early August, the first satellite phone arrived in the village. A communication station was set up at the mining office. Calls cost $10 a minute, far too much for most people, but in emergencies, it could be a lifeline. Gabe called his mother-in-law to let her know Arthur was healthy and everything was fine. Vera happened to be nearby, bringing lunch for a geologist who couldn't leave his post, and she overheard his voice through the open door. Yes, there's someone, Gabe was saying. A woman. From Chicago. She's a teacher. Arthur likes her. A pause. His mother-in-law's muffled voice, worried. Mom, I know. I remember Linda. But life goes on. Those simple words, almost banal, filled Vera with a sudden, aching tenderness. Life goes on. In that phrase lay everything, truth, wisdom, forgiveness. It wasn't betrayal of memory or denial of the past, just the quiet continuation of a river that can't stop, even if it tried. Let's go into the taiga for a few days, Gabe said later, as casually as if he were suggesting a trip to the store. They were having dinner, he, Vera, and Arthur, who was devouring his bowl of buckwheat with canned stew. August was waning, the evenings turning cool, the sunsets sharper and more vivid, as if nature were trying to pour all its colors into the world before winter came. The taiga? Vera raised an eyebrow. What for? No reason, Gabe shrugged, though something flickered in his eyes, something Vera couldn't quite read. I've got 2 days off, first time in 6 months. I want to show you the real taiga, not the edge by the village. There's a cabin about 30 miles from here. The geologists use it when they're out on expeditions. Arthur can stay with Darlene. I don't mind, Arthur piped up right away. Aunt Darlene promised to teach me how to bake pies. Vera met Gabe's eyes. It wasn't just an invitation anymore, it was something deeper, more personal. And deep down, she felt a quiet certainty, something important would happen out there. Something that would change everything. All right, she said, let's go. The truck jolted along the rutted logging road, a straight corridor carved through the trees. The wheels sank into puddles of dark water, then bounced over roots. Vera gripped the door handle, trying not to bite her tongue from the shaking. Gabe drove with steady confidence, hands calm on the wheel, the hands of a man who no longer expects surprises from life because he's already seen them all. He told her stories about the land, how they once floated timber down the rivers, how the first prospectors hunted for veins of gold, how he once got lost and wandered for 3 days, heading north by the moss on the trees. This is as far as we can drive, he said when the road ended at an overgrown ravine. The rest is on foot, 5 kilometers, no more. He pulled a weathered backpack from the trunk, its straps worn thin, its fabric sun-bleached and patched. Vera noticed there was only one. A blush of realization spread through her. This trip was really just for the two of them. One roof, one bed, one life. The trail wound between trees, climbing low hills, dipping into soggy hollows. Gabe walked ahead, showing her where to step to avoid the mud, glancing back now and then to make sure she was okay. Vera tried to keep up, though her city muscles ached from the strain. That's wild rosemary, Gabe said, pointing to a shrub with small leathery leaves. Good for tea, cures colds. And that's fireweed. Dry the leaves, makes a tea almost like the real thing. Over there, that's cloudberry. Amber-colored berry, the northernmost kind. Bit late in the season, but we might find a few. Vera listened, absorbing not just the words but the sound of his voice, calm, low, with that quiet cadence of a man who rarely speaks but only says what matters. She remembered that same tone from the train, when they'd sat in the frozen observation car, watching stars shimmer over snow-covered pines. Careful, Gabe said, stopping by a fallen larch stretched across a stream. That's our bridge. Slippery after rain. He reached out his hand, and Vera placed hers in his, rough with calluses, warm, steady. They crossed the stream, balancing on the slick bark, and for a moment she felt like a tightrope walker above a chasm. Only instead of an abyss, there was cold, moss-scented water below, and instead of a rope, a living tree that still remembered the earth, the sky, the wind in its crown. "We're almost there," Gabe said as they climbed a gentle slope. "See it?" The cabin stood in a small clearing surrounded by tall arches, a squat little house of weather-darkened logs, its moss-covered roof sloping low, a tiny window covered with plastic instead of glass. A woodpile stood beside it, and a stream trickled down from the hillside nearby. "It's beautiful," Vera breathed. Gabe smiled, really smiled, with his whole face. She'd never seen that expression back in the village, as if he'd been saving it for this place, for her. "You like it?" "I love it." Inside, the cabin was even smaller than it looked. One room, a small cast-iron stove, a rough wooden table, 2 stools, bunks along the wall. In the corner, a stack of firewood, a few cans of food with faded labels, matches, salt, some tools. On the wall hung an old calendar from 1997, the year of the financial crash. Gabe set to work lighting the stove, while Vera looked around, taking it all in, the sparse, functional space built not for comfort but for survival. Everything pared down to the essentials, nothing unnecessary. And in that simplicity, she felt something like freedom, freedom from noise, from clutter, from everything that didn't truly matter. "Let's warm up," Gabe said, adding a few dry branches to the stove. "And then I'll make us some special tea." He took a small linen pouch from his backpack and tossed a few pine cones into the boiling water. The cabin filled with a rich, resinous aroma, the scent of the taiga itself, concentrated in a tiny kettle. They sat by the stove, warming their hands on tin mugs of steaming tea, talking about childhood, about the books they'd read, about dreams that come just before dawn. The kind of things people never mention in daily life, but that rise naturally to the surface when you're far from the world, alone with someone you trust. Gabe spoke of his father, a geologist who died during an expedition in Kamchatka, and of his mother, who still lived in Portland and sent him letters filled with pressed flowers. He told her about his first expedition, when he'd nearly frozen to death after losing his way in a blizzard. Vera spoke of her teacher parents, of her childhood in provincial Springfield, where the most magical place was the public library. Of how, at 14, she'd read the Iliad and fallen in love with the ancient world, with heroes and gods, with that raw, perilous existence where a person lived constantly on the edge, always ready for glory or for death. Darkness thickened outside the small window, and Vera realized with surprise that true night had finally come, the first in months. The endless daylight was over, giving way to autumn, with its stars, mists, and first hints of frost. Gabe turned down the kerosene lamp, leaving only the soft red glow of the stove dancing across the walls. In that flickering light, his face looked younger, gentler. He moved closer, and she felt the warmth of his body, subtle, not intrusive, but unmistakably real, like the steady heat of a campfire. "Can I?" he asked. Vera nodded, unable to speak. His kiss was tender, almost reverent, not taking, but giving. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the moment, the roughness of his palms on her shoulders, the scent of pine and smoke, the quiet crackle of burning wood. Everything suddenly became simple, clear, like lines of a beloved poem she'd known by heart her whole life. The night was still. Only the wind whispered in the larches, and the embers in the stove crackled softly as they cooled. They lay together in sleeping bags spread across the bunks, their bodies close, Vera listening to Gabe's even breathing, feeling a deep calm settle over her. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid, not of the future, not of the past, not of her own choices. There was only trust, in the man beside her, in the world around them, and in herself. They woke at dawn, Gabe by habit, Vera from the strange, profound silence. Pale light filtered through the window, growing stronger by the minute. "Come on," Gabe said, pulling on his jacket. "I want to show you something." They climbed a low hill where the forest opened into a clearing. Below them stretched the endless taiga, shimmering in shades of green, dark, almost black in the valleys, bright and transparent over the swamps and meadows. On the horizon, dawn unfolded, pale pink at first, then deepening into gold. Gabe stood beside her, quiet, focused, like a man on the verge of saying something that would change everything. Vera watched his profile, the straight nose, the firm jaw, the silver in his hair, the faint lines around his eyes. A man who had lived a hard life and never broken. A man about to speak words that would alter both their paths. "I want you to stay," he said finally, still looking toward the sunrise. Not for a month, not for the summer. For good. Vera said nothing. Birds sang in the forest, the wind stirred the grass at their feet. The world kept moving, unaware that for two people on a hillside, time had stopped. What about my classics? She asked at last. My degree? I've spent 10 years preparing my dissertation. Gabe turned to her. There was no pleading in his eyes, no pressure, only quiet understanding, and something deeper, unspoken. I don't know, he said. Maybe you'll write it here. Maybe you'll go back someday. He hesitated. I can't decide for you. I just know I want you here. And Arthur does too. Yesterday he asked, is Vera staying? A gust of wind caught a loose strand of her hair. Vera tucked it behind her ear automatically, thinking about the choice she would have to make, not now, not out of pressure, but soon. Very soon. She knew, if she stayed, her academic career would end. Chicago would forget her. Without defending her dissertation, without publishing, without conferences, she'd become just another rural teacher. All those years of work, the sleepless nights, the exams, gone. But she also knew that if she returned to Chicago, she'd go back to loneliness. Rented rooms with sagging couches and shared bathrooms. Substitute teaching in private schools that paid poorly and late. The polite condescension of former classmates already holding positions at prestigious universities. Oh, Svetlov? Didn't she move somewhere? And her parents, saying with quiet satisfaction, we told you so. And here was a man who looked at her as if she were a star fallen into his hands. A boy who begged her to teach him Greek and listened raptly to stories of Odysseus and Penelope. A wild land that accepted her without judgment, without pity. I'm scared, Vera whispered, so softly that Gabe barely heard. Scared of losing myself. Of becoming just your wife. Will you be my wife, then? A jay screeched somewhere above the trees, sharp, urgent, as if pushing her toward an answer. A long pause followed, wide enough to hold an entire lifetime. Yes, Vera said. I will. That night, the air turned colder, as if autumn had suddenly remembered them. They lay outside on the grass in front of the cabin, wrapped in their sleeping bags, watching the stars, the first true stars after the long summer days, bright and almost tangible. Gabe pointed to the sky. There, see Perseus? He traced a shape with his hand. Remember, you promised to tell me how he saved Andromeda. Vera smiled. Of course she remembered, that conversation on the train, when they were strangers but already bound by something they couldn't name. He killed Medusa the Gorgon, cut off her head, she began softly, her eyes on the constellations. Then, flying over the sea, he saw a girl chained to a rock. She was to be sacrificed to a sea monster. Perseus fell in love at first sight, descended, killed the beast, and freed her. He married her. A beautiful story, Gabe said, finding her hand under the stars. But it's a myth, Gabe, Vera replied. In real life, there are no heroes with winged sandals. There's just us, ordinary, tired, flawed. And no monsters, only circumstances. Work, money, distance, sick wives, dead strangers on trains. He turned to her. In the starlight, his eyes looked dark, almost black. But there's us. That has to mean something. Yes, Vera whispered, tears stinging her eyes, not from grief, but from a piercing, almost painful happiness. It means everything. Vera, Dad. Arthur ran to meet them as the truck rolled up to the house. I learned to bake pies, and Darlene showed me how to set traps for grouse. He hugged his father, then suddenly threw his arms around Vera's waist. Darlene says you're staying. His voice was so full of joy that the last shard of doubt in Vera's heart finally melted. Yes, she said, stroking his tousled hair. I'm staying. Darlene stood on her porch, smiling, a little teasingly, but kindly too. Of course she already knew. In a small village, news travels faster than the wind. By now everyone must have heard that Gabe had proposed to the Chicago teacher, and that she'd said yes. The next morning, Vera submitted her official application at the school for a permanent position. The principal, a wiry woman with withered skin and calm, knowing eyes, didn't seem surprised. She just nodded. English, literature, and a bit of history. Full position, $3,000 a year. I know, for Chicago that's nothing. But here it's decent money. I didn't come for the money, Vera said. And it was the truth. That evening, she wrote a letter to her academic advisor at the university. She rewrote it 3 times, searching for words that would neither hurt the person who believed in her nor disguise the truth. In the end, she kept it simple and honest. I've found another life. Maybe it's running away. Maybe it's a mistake. But I want to try. Thank you for everything you've done for me. Vera. The end of August was surprisingly warm. They spent the last day before the school year together, Vera, Gabe, and Arthur, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the clouds pink and gold. Tomorrow Arthur would leave for Juneau to stay with his grandmother. The school year was beginning, and it was time for him to go back. "Dad, will you come for Christmas?" he asked, leaning against his father. "And bring Vera too?" "Of course," Gabe said, wrapping an arm around his son's shoulders. Vera looked out over the taiga glowing in the evening light and thought about the strange turns of fate. About Gordon, the man from the train who had just wanted to talk, and whom she had turned away. About her winter self, the woman who'd walked away from him and carried that guilt for months. And about what Gabe had told her back then. Life is longer than one mistake. You'll see. Now she saw. Life truly was longer than any single mistake, longer than any one choice. It flowed on, shifting shape like a river changing its course, but still remaining a river. "What are you thinking about?" Gabe asked, noticing her faraway look. "That you were right," she said with a faint smile. "Life doesn't end. It just changes." He took her hand, naturally, as if he'd always done it. Arthur was dozing, his head resting on Vera's lap. The dog lay beside the porch, occasionally lifting its head to follow a bird in flight. Somewhere deep in the forest, a raven cried out, low and hoarse. News was spreading through the village. By winter, Cold Creek would finally get internet. Satellite, expensive, but real. Vera thought that maybe she could write an article about women and ancient Greek tragedy, send it to a journal, reconnect with her colleagues in Chicago. Maybe her academic life wasn't lost after all, just changed. Maybe it would now weave together with this northern existence, teaching in a small school, telling children stories of gods and heroes. Above the taiga, the first star appeared, bright, as if cutting a thin seam between day and night. Perseus, Vera thought, the one who had saved Andromeda from the monster. She squeezed Gabe's hand, and he returned the pressure, no words, just understanding. Two people beneath a vast sky, who had found each other at the edge of the world. Juneau greeted them with soft, feathery snow, as if the city had dressed up for the new year. The streetlights glowed warmly over the wooden houses with carved trim, turning the streets into a scene from an old fairy tale. Vera gazed out the bus window, her heart fluttering not only at the beauty of the winter city, but at the thought of the meeting ahead. Nina Peterson, Linda's mother, Arthur's grandmother, was waiting for them, the woman who had raised the boy after the accident. What would she say to the one who had taken her daughter's place? As if sensing Vera's anxiety, Gabe squeezed her hand. Arthur, worn out from the long trip, rested his head on his father's shoulder, half asleep but glowing with excitement. Nina's house stood on a quiet street in the old part of town, 2 stories with a small mezzanine and a snow-covered front garden. The woman who opened the door was tall and upright, her silver hair smoothly pulled back, her eyes steady and watchful. In those eyes, Vera saw Arthur, that same serious, appraising gaze. "Well, hello there," Nina said, embracing her grandson. "Look at you, all grown up." Then she turned to Vera. There was no hostility in her face, no judgment, only quiet curiosity. "So, you must be Vera. Come in, don't stand out there in the cold." The house smelled of pine, cinnamon, and vanilla, the sense of childhood, of celebration. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with old glass ornaments. The table was set, a cranberry pie cooling beside flickering candles. That first evening passed in a kind of cautious silence. They talked mostly about Arthur, his studies, his friends, hockey. No one mentioned the adult world, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. Only late at night, when the boy had gone to bed and Gabe stepped outside for a smoke, did Nina finally speak. Her voice was soft but direct, her eyes fixed on Vera. "Linda was my daughter. I loved her. I still do." Vera said nothing, her throat tightening. What could she possibly say? That she understood? She didn't. That she was sorry? It would sound hollow. The truth was, if not for Linda's death, there would be no new life, no this moment. "But she's gone," Nina continued, not accusingly, just with quiet acceptance. "And life belongs to the living. Gabe's a good man. He deserves to be happy. And Arthur needs a mother. Not a replacement, no. Just someone who'll be there." "I'll do my best," Vera said softly. Those 4 words meant more than 1,000 promises. Nina nodded. The conversation was over, but both women knew they'd said everything that mattered. In the days that followed, the tension eased. It didn't disappear, it simply settled into something gentle, familiar. They were learning to coexist, 2 women bound by the lives of one man and one boy. Arthur proudly showed Vera around his city, the wooden houses Juneau was famous for, the old waterfront, the river that never froze even in deep winter. He told her stories he'd heard from his grandmother, his teachers, his friends. There was a strange mix in him, a child's excitement and an adult's gravity, as though part of him had grown up too soon. One afternoon they wandered into a little second-hand bookstore, the kind filled floor to ceiling with old volumes, smelling of paper and ink. Vera moved slowly between the shelves, almost dizzy with happiness. After half a year in the taiga, surrounded by a scarcity of books, to stand among so many felt miraculous. Her eyes fell on a worn volume with a faded spine, the Iliad, 1949 edition, in ancient Greek. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The familiar lines came alive in her mind, "Sing, O goddess, the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus." She hadn't seen Greek text since she'd left Chicago. It felt as if a sealed part of her soul had been opened again, breathing freely at last. "Do you like it?" Arthur asked, peering over her shoulder. "It's Greek, right? Like you taught me?" "Yes," Vera whispered, fighting back tears. "It's a very old story, about war, and heroes, and gods." "Let's buy it," he said matter-of-factly. "I've got money. Grandma gave me some." "No." Vera smiled through the tears. "I'll buy it. It's my gift, to myself." As she stepped out of the shop, the book carefully wrapped in paper, she realized she was crying, not from sorrow, but from a fierce, piercing joy. The circle had closed. Her past and present had finally met. That evening, December 31st, with just an hour left before midnight and the house buzzing with holiday cheer, Gabe said quietly, "Come on. I want to show you something." They stepped out onto the back porch into a small yard framed by old apple trees. The snow crunched beneath their boots, the frosty air stung their lungs, and above them stretched a vast, starry sky, bright and endless, just like the one over the taiga. Gabe reached into his coat pocket and took out a small box. "I know it's fast," Gabe said, his voice quiet but steady. "But at my age, I don't want to wait anymore." The ring was simple, silver, unadorned, without a single stone. As honest and genuine as the man who held it out to her. "And at my age too," Vera replied. And it was the absolute truth. She held out her hand, and the ring slipped onto her finger, cool at first, then quickly warming to the heat of her skin. Just like this new life of hers, once foreign and cold, now becoming her own. In February, they were married at the Fairbanks Registry Office, a small, bright building with columns that looked more like a country community hall than a city courthouse. It took them 2 days to get there, first by hitching rides to the district center, then by bus. Vera wore her only dress, a dark blue one she'd once bought in Chicago for university events. Gabe wore a clean shirt and a jacket borrowed from his supervisor at the mine. The witnesses were Darlene and, to everyone's surprise, Alice. She'd come all the way from Juneau, no longer the sharp, defensive artist Vera remembered, but calmer, more grounded. The two women had been writing to each other all autumn, at first cautiously, then more openly. A strange friendship born from a shared love for the same man. "You look good," Alice said, lighting a cigarette outside the registry building. "Like a real geologist's wife." "Not a wife yet," Vera smiled. "You are now. The papers are just catching up." There was no banquet, no speeches, only a modest dinner at a small hotel, 1 bottle of champagne for 4, a few heartfelt toasts, and quiet laughter. Then came the long road home to Cold Creek, where her students, Gabe's co-workers, and their quiet, steady life awaited, a life that was now their life. Vera Rowe, officially Rowe now, sat by the window that night, writing in a brand new notebook she'd bought in Fairbanks just for this moment. Andromeda was saved by Perseus. But I saved myself, by agreeing to be saved. By getting on that train. By staying. Tonight, Gabe and I looked at the same stars we saw back then on the journey north. But now I know, it's not a myth. It's my life. Outside, snow sparkled under the lamplight, thick flakes drifting lazily through the air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. In the next room, Gabe was sleeping, exhausted from his 2-day shift, but peaceful. And here, in the small room that was now their shared home, Vera Rowe was finishing one story and beginning another. The stars above the northern wilderness still burned bright every night. They silently watch over the small wooden house where a woman from the city and a man who's known every shade of loss have found something together that can't be summed up by the simple word happiness. It's something deeper, an understanding that real life is nothing like myths or fairy tales. There are no heroes with winged sandals, no monsters devouring the innocent. There are only people, with their mistakes, fears, hopes, and that astonishing ability to start over, even when it feels like everything is lost. The story of Vera and Gabe isn't just a love story. It's about choosing between the path you were meant to follow and the one your heart leads you to. About the courage it takes to risk everything for a chance at something real. And now, what would you choose? Would you stay in the safety of the familiar, or risk it all for something true, even if it's far away and uncertain? What would you have done in Vera's place? Or maybe you see yourself in Gabe, a person who held on for years to a love that could no longer answer. Share your thoughts in the comments. We truly want to know what you think of this story, what moved you, what made you reflect on your own life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like and share it with your friends. Maybe it will reach someone who needs to hear it, someone standing on the edge of their own decision. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories about lives that intertwine in the most unexpected ways, about choices that change everything, and about how true love sometimes comes from the most unlikely places. Maybe even from a chance meeting on a train cutting through the winter wilderness.